Is fake it until you make it a good strategy for communication? Hello and welcome to Communication Psychology and HR. My name is Gerhard. I'm a psychologist from Hamburg, Germany, specialized in international, intercultural and multilingual contexts. You may have heard such a recommendation, especially against so-called imposter syndrome, which is a fancy word for feeling insecure. Fake it until you make it. Is it a good one? Well, we first need to define what we mean by faking it. I hope you don't mean outright lying to your audience, to other people. This is a very bad strategy, also from purely egotistical reasons. In today's highly transparent and with a long-term memory internet environment, it's very, very stupid to lie, because all our lies are somehow recorded and will be played back to us, as you see in the current Epstein scandal. There were so many celebrities that believed the actual information would never come out, so they confidently posed in interviews to never have known the man or of having interrupted the relationship with them and so on. And now this information is coming out. So the same applies for every one of us. So we should be also, for egotistical reasons, careful to be truthful. Now, what we probably mean is that we feel somehow nervous before a conversation and we want somehow to mask this. Especially in Germany, I always remember that the first feedback people gave after presentation was whether someone looked sure of himself or not. And if this is correct or not as the principal feedback to give to other people, it's a totally different debate, but at least most of us are concerned often, first and foremost, how did we look and whether we made an impression of being sure of ourselves or not. Why? Because, of course, there's a presumed link between the perception of being sure and the perception of being competent. So nervous people believe that if their nervousness becomes uncovered, then they will be perceived as incompetent, especially in a job interview or in a public presentation. Now, is this really so? Is also another topic for debate and to go deep into the psychological research. However, here are some recommendations and comments. On the one hand, people are not very good in detecting lies. So in detecting false from true information, separating it. So that's actually quite difficult to do. But people are quite good in detecting emotions. So to hide nervousness is a quite complicated feat. My recommendation would be to not hide it. So there are different things to do. First, there are those who recommend, especially before public speaking, that you somehow transform nervousness or anxiety into enthusiasm, because such is the claim that both involve some kind of activation of your nervous system. And if you change the label or give it another frame, then you can use it for positive purposes. So it's no longer I'm afraid of my audience, but I'm so excited to share this valuable information with you. This may or may not be helpful. We need to try it out. You need to try it out. But in general, shifting the focus may actually be beneficial, because in nervousness, the focus is on ourselves, how we are judged. But if we shift to enthusiasm, we focus on what we can bring to other people, what valuable information, how they will be better off after hearing what we have to say. But you can also address this nervousness and speak openly about this. Now the question is, to what degree and how? Of course, it needs to be appropriate. But it's better to address it than not address it, because if you don't address it, people nonetheless will observe your body language and your voice, if it's calm, if it's somehow trembling. So in any case, people will be making their own interpretation. So if you address this openly and say, oh, I'm a bit nervous because this is the first time that I actually do this presentation, for example, in a foreign language or with people from your country. And if you address in an appropriate amount and give a reason that is justifiable and doesn't necessarily undermine your competence, then the other person probably will accept it, or at least you can control what is partially in the heads of the other people. And being for the first time in a situation, if you give it a very specific name, then it's also justifiable. It doesn't mean that you are completely unexperienced, but for example, it's my first meeting with people from Japan, and I'm a bit nervous if I can, if my social skills are not adequate, if I'm how to present it to you, or it's the first time that I collaborate with a company from your sector, and I'm a bit nervous if we can understand each other. Well, you need to think about how to phrase this, but this doesn't mean that I admit of not having any experience at all, but it's just the first time I do it in a foreign language. It's the first time in a certain industry, in a certain company, and people will be quite forgiving of that. On the contrary, there's lots of research showing that self-disclosure, that is showing deep or emotional information about yourself, especially makes you more likable for the other person. And typically the other person will reciprocate. Now, of course, always the caveat, it needs to be appropriate, so you don't share private information that would maybe make the other person feel ashamed or uncomfortable. But you should give a justifiable reason for being nervous, not too long. That should be appropriate, but then it's out, it's spoken out loud, and then the other person mentally can focus on other things. Yes, because otherwise they will be thinking about you are so nervous, and it will be a distraction. So the recommendation is always try to self-disclose a bit, so the other person has a reasonable explanation for how you behave, so that you can move on to the other more important topics of the meeting. What do you think? I wish you much success in your communication. If you have questions, comments, please leave them here.